Recording started.
Okay. All right. Thank you, everyone, for attending our webinar. This is our fourth webinar in the Teaching is the Core series. Today's webinar is going to focus on developing action plans and professional development. And just like we've had for our previous webinars, Dr. Susan Brookhart will be leading us today. So let me go to the introductions page. Dr. Brookhart is a leading expert in the field of classroom assessment, and she's also an educational consultant. Before becoming a consultant, Dr. Brookhart was a professor at the Department of Educational Foundations and Leadership at Duquesne University, and prior to that, she was a teacher. Dr. Brookhart has spent the last 20 years studying and writing about classroom assessment, and she is an internationally known scholar in this field. So that's Dr. Brookhart, the first picture that you see on your slide. My name is Juliette Lyons-Thomas, and I'm a fellow at the Regents Research Fund. I am facilitating the webinars, and I do have a couple of things I want to talk about before I hand the reins over to Dr. Brookhart. So the main thing is just to tell you a little bit about our webinar norms. So you may have noticed that if you called in, your phone line was placed on mute, and we're just doing that to cut down on background noise since we're expecting a large number of attendees. If everyone has their phones unmuted, we get a lot of sounds on the line. So you are muted for that reason. But if you do have a question or a comment, and we do welcome questions or comments throughout the webinar, we would like you to send them in. Instead of unmuting yourself, what we're asking folks to do is to send their comment or question in the chat box, which is located, let's see, on the right side of your screen, either at the top or the bottom. For me, it's at the bottom, but I think a bunch of folks have seen the chat box at the top of their screen. Do be sure to send your message to everybody. You have the option to select to send it to particular people. I think the default is to send it to the host, so you'll have to actually select everyone from that list to make sure that it gets to everyone. Okay, and then last of all, at the end of the webinar, we are going to ask you to fill out a survey based on your experience today. We use this feedback to plan our next webinars. At the moment, we just had 4 webinars, but we're considering to plan a 5th webinar based on feedback. So if you have anything that you would like us to cover that you feel didn't get addressed in previous webinars, do let us know through that survey. And again, we'll give you the link at the end of the webinar, and you can fill it out. And it's very, very short. It's just 3 questions. It shouldn't take more than a couple of minutes. And just so you know, learning outcomes from today's webinar, as I mentioned, the webinar is going to focus on the action plan, which is based on your assessment reviews and professional development. So the purpose of this webinar is to really help districts to focus on these two aspects of the Teaching as the Core grant. And with that, I'm going to pass it over to Dr. Brookhart. Just looking for the presenter. There we go. So Dr. Brookhart, you should have presenter privileges.
Yes, it looks like I do. Thank you, Juliette. So today we're going to talk about action plan and professional development. So I began with a picture of an action plan just for a visual, but I want you to know that as far as I know, there is no accepted format that every action plan has to be in. Think of it like a lesson plan. There are lots and lots of different ways you can write up a lesson plan, and the important thing is that you're planning a good lesson. So that little visual is the way some people do action plans, but there are all sorts of other ways to do it. In fact, I think there's Office software has planning software if you want to use it. When I make a plan, I just make a sort of list. So however you want to do it, I just needed a visual to start with. So the idea of having an action plan, in my mind, begs the question, plan for what? So I want to start there. But what you see on the screen there is just a slightly shortened version of the 4 goals for the Teaching is the Core program. First, to decide which assessments support the instructional goals of the district and consortium. To eliminate unnecessary assessment and to increase the use of diverse and quality assessment. To review the local assessments that are currently in use for your annual professional performance review, and to establish a professional development program to aid teachers in identifying high-quality assessments and improving assessment practices. So if that is what the Teaching is the Core grant is supposed to be aiming for, then your action plan needs to be how you plan to get those things done in your district, which would seem relatively straightforward, but I think it's easy to get stuck at the stage that, oh, I have to write a plan, and forget that you need to go back and decide what those goals are. So the districts have been instructed to move through Teaching is the Core in 4 phases, and you're looking at them there. Assessment review we talked a lot about in the first webinar because there's a lot of relevance to the reliability and validity of the assessments in the assessment review process. So you review your assessments, you develop an action plan, then you implement the action plan. In other words, you do what you said you would do, and then you identify ongoing professional development that will keep the assessment quality in your district high. So the first question I want to ask the people who are listening is, in your district, starting from the top, if you think of assessment review as phase 1, action plan is phase 2, and so on, where is your district right now? In what phase are you? That's a bad sentence. In what phase are you located? So that I can get a flavor of who I'm talking to here. Assessment review, action plan, implementation. And I'll wait a minute for people to type some things into the chat box.
I have one message privately that says assessment review.
Okay, and I've got a lot of everyone's that say assessment review. Aha, perhaps even pre-planning. Okay, well, there's one that's beginning in January, assessment review. All right.
And I have another private message. Oh, 2 more private messages that say assessment review. Just as a note to everyone, sorry, Dr. Brookhart, I'm just going to interrupt you really quickly. It's for those of you who are typing in your responses, do remember to direct your message to everyone. The default is Vicki Jones, the host of the meeting, but if you select everyone, then your message will go to everyone. Sorry, Dr. Brookhart, just wanted to get that in there.
Okay. I can summarize this point. Looks like most people are in the assessment review phase. Some of them looking forward to the action plan coming up, and at least a couple of them mindful that professional development, while it's phase 4 in the way this program is written up, actually there are professional development aspects to all 4 of the phases, which is a good insight, in my opinion. So the good news for me is that this webinar is not too late. I was thinking, well, geez, talking about action plans when people have already done them wouldn't make much sense. But so we're in time, and that makes me happy. So that's good. So those are the phases. But I'm going to say before you start an assessment review, you need to know what the assessments are supposed to do. So while it says assessment review is phase 1, if you think about that goal the first goal of the Teaching of the Core program, which assessments support the instructional goals of the district or the consortium, you need to know what those instructional goals are. And so before you know which assessments to review, you need to know what do we want assessment information about. So I have a list of some obvious places to look for instructional goals there. Your district may have some other places to look as well. But at the very least, they're state standards. Your district should have curriculum documents. Some of them might be in the form of curriculum maps, but whatever documentation you have, it ought to have what you want your students to learn listed there. And this is a big deal for a couple of reasons. One is that the assessments that you select to review will be based on this, and the kind of assessment information you need will be based on the purpose that you have for using it. So, so you have a complication right off the bat. If you're talking about assessment information for something like an annual performance review, you don't need terribly fine-grained information. You basically need to know, in a general way, did students learn what the curriculum says I should teach them? But if you want instructionally actionable information, things that you can actually use to inform instruction, a general sense of how kids are doing is not detailed enough information. The obvious, the sort of one end of that continuum is the state test, which only asks for one judgment in, say, reading and one in mathematics and one in science. It will give you a level of student performance that basically says, can he read or can't he read? And that won't help you if you want to try and change your reading instruction. So for your annual performance review assessments, those can be pretty general, pretty aggregated, but if you're trying to use the same assessments for instructional reform and improvement, a general goal won't work. So the goal can't be reading. It might need to be something smaller, like can they do main idea? How are they with supporting details? How are they at figuring out how a text is organized and using that to help them read through it? So it's not just as simple as pick some instructional goals. The grain size of the goal will vary with the purpose that you have for using the information from the assessment. So since this Teaching is the Core seems to be talking about both instructional improvement and performance review, the best advice I can give you is pick assessments that are at a fine-grained enough level that you could use them for instructional improvement. And then for something like performance review, you can always aggregate up. For instance, if you did have a reading test that or a series of reading assessments where you did find out about main ideas, supporting details, how is text organized, anything, a character plot, informational text, things like how the organization helps you understand the concepts that the text is trying to teach or whatever it is, then you could always summarize them together by making a total score out of a bunch of parts. But you can't add in information that isn't there. So if you have a test or a performance assessment that's so general that you just get a total score, you won't be able to make much instructional change. For an example, think of a writing assessment. If all you need to know is, did this teacher teach kids to write, then you can give a writing assessment and look at the total scores. But if you want to know, what should I, if I'm that teacher, do next, you need not just can they write or not total scores. You need to look at more fine-grained information, ideas, voice, conventions. Maybe the kids have great ideas, but their writing conventions are not so good. Maybe they have lovely, precise, very pedantic prose, but the ideas in them aren't very good. That implies two very different follow-up kinds of instruction. So anyway, I didn't mean to spend that much time on this slide, but what the assessment is supposed to show you is a big deal when you review it. And the purpose is where you look to decide how fine-grained you need your information. And in this particular Teaching is the Core project, you have a couple of purposes going. And I hope that was clear to everybody. But I sort of felt like that was a soapbox moment that I needed to talk about. Okay, so once you, oh, look at me spelling assessment wrong. I apologize for that. Once you have decided what kinds of assessment information, there are lots of places you can look for assessment. And what you have on the screen there is a diagram of one way to think about the kinds of assessments that you have around. One of the dimensions is from classroom focus to large scale, and the other dimension is from more formative to more summative. So when you look at assessments that you are going to be using for this purpose, you will not be looking at large-scale accountability assessments probably. You won't be looking at the state test, for instance. And you probably won't be looking at classroom formative assessment strategies that are in the moment and different in every classroom. You will probably be looking at either that upper left-hand quadrant, things that are more formative in purpose but are administered across classrooms, things like interim assessments or common formative assessments. Or you might also be looking at some assessments that are used in classrooms for more summative purposes, like things that you give kids and they get grades on. So that sort of defines your universe of where to look for your assessments. Now, there's a little catch to how assessments like this, what kind of information they actually give you. State accountability assessments give very broad stroke, big grain size information, like 1 score for reading or math or science. Interim, benchmark, and common formative assessments typically give smaller grain sized information on instructionally actionable parts of state standards, as we were talking about before. Grading things usually are things like unit tests or performance assessments and projects that go into units, and they are typically designed to give you information on reporting standards. That is the chunk of the standard that the kids learned in a given reporting period that you're going to need to reflect on the report card. And classroom formative assessments are usually very small grain size on daily lesson kind of learning targets so that students can see how they're doing right now on some small piece of content that they're working on some knowledge or skills that they're working on right in the class at the moment. So if you remember back from my little soapbox that says you need assessments at the right grain size for your purpose, the assessments that you have laying around in your district already range in grain size, or should anyway, and you need to know where to look for them. So if you want to take just a second and think, the people who are in the assessment review process, the assessments that you have reviewed, what kinds of assessments have they been primarily? Have they been interim or common and formative assessments? Have they been things like unit tests and projects that are typically given grades? What sort of assessments have you been using for your assessment review? I'll take a minute and wait and see what goes into the APR summatives, benchmarks. Okay, so you are using extra classroom assessments, which is kind of what I thought. Good. Locally developed mid and end year assessments. Okay. All right. Thank you. That is helpful to me to know what you're looking at there. So if you've selected your purpose, you've selected your assessments, then the assessment review, if you notice, the first thing you do after you name the thing is talk about what it is supposed to be measuring. So the first piece of the assessment review should look at, is that what we want to be measuring for the purpose that we're using it for? And that I talked a lot about that in the very first webinar when we talked about how that goes to validity, the idea that the assessment information you're getting matches the purpose you're using it for. Not going to spend a lot of time on that today because most of you are already in that process, and I did spend a whole webinar on that. But it's important to notice that this looking at what you want to know comes before even assessment review. After the assessment review, the outcome of that should be recommendations to keep, eliminate, modify, or create assessments, and some rationale for why. So some of the assessments you're going to think, those are just great. This is doing what it's supposed to do and I want to keep it. Others you might decide are unnecessary or duplicate something or are not good assessments. Some might be sort of on track but just need some modifying, and there may be some gaps in things that you want to assess and don't have an assessment for. So those outcomes become then the goals for your action plan. The action plan should say who is going to do all of these changes in the assessments that you have just recommended. So your action plan should literally talk about what you will do to change the assessments. Who is going to be the group that modifies this particular assessment? Are they the right people? If it's a third grade reading assessment, for instance, are there people there who teach third grade reading or elementary reading at least? When are they going to meet? When are they going to do this? By when are they going to have the modified exam ready for other people to look at or for a few students to try out? If they're going to create an exam, what is the exam that needs to be created? Who are the people who are going to do that? When are they going to meet and do that? By when are they going to have this assessment ready? Are they going to try it out? Are they going to run it by some other people in the district or some other folks? How is that going to work? That's your action plan. And then you need a schedule to share the locally developed assessment strategies and resources with other grant recipients using a secure network to be set up by the New York State Department of Education, it said in the materials I looked at. So what you need to do is, in your action plan, put in some dates as well as the who and what, put in the when as well. So when you make those plans, meet in groups that make sense. Use a protocol if you need to. One of those little organizers that says we're going to spend 5 minutes talking about assessment A, and then we'll have a list of people, and then we'll spend 10 minutes talking about assessment B or whatever. When I do planning meetings, I find protocols help keep people from sort of getting all stuck in sidetrack issues and then coming to the end of the hour and thinking, oh my goodness, we didn't get done what we were supposed to get done. Review the assessment system to make sure that the assessments yield all the necessary information. Presumably the assessments that you're talking about, and according to what you put in the chat box to me, the assessments that you're talking about come from one part of this assessment system. Do those assessments fit in with all the other assessments that are going on? Are they consistent with, for instance, teaching the way it's taught, and the way standards are taught in classroom? Are they consistent with what the state holds you accountable for? Make sure that the assessments that you are using for the purpose of this grant really do fit into your system. I think I pretty much said this already. For each assessment that's to be eliminated or modified, you need literally the plan: who, when, and how. So I'm going to go back to you in your chat box, and I'm going to ask you if, when you have been making your action plans, you have been figuring these things out. Have you actually made lists of people, or not by name, but by qualification, like third grade reading or something? Do you have? Are you having success figuring this out? Or are there questions? I guess to me, this is a fairly straightforward thing. If we need to modify this particular exam, let's identify who's going to do it and when they're going to do it and by when it's going to be done. And so I'm going to skip right on if that's not a problem. So take a minute to ask any questions you have about this sort of thing. For the groups that are in their assessment review and don't have an answer to this question yet, it might be helpful for all of us to know, are there that many assessments that you have identified that need to be eliminated or modified? Because the more of those you have, the bigger the action plan is going to need to be. So take a minute and make some comments and questions into that chat box so that we can be a little specific here. Thank you. Aha. If an assessment is deemed unnecessary and to be eliminated, does it have to be replaced? Ooh, I didn't mean I did not mean for my slide to imply that it does. If your assessment is eliminated because it's duplicating information you have in other assessments, no, it doesn't need to be replaced. If your assessment is eliminated because it's a bad assessment, but now you don't have an assessment of some important content, yes, it does need to be replaced. Most are indicating modified. Large numbers require revision. You know, I'm not surprised about that. It would be really unusual to find that anybody's quiver full of assessments were all just wonderfully designed and they didn't need any changes. But it would also be, at least in my experience, very unusual to come across a stack of assessments that all were just horrible and just needed to be replaced. I think modified is not surprising. The good news is it's easier to modify one than to start from scratch. So the committee will have something to start with. What you need to do is go back to that. What is this supposed to be measuring? How many of what kinds of questions or tasks does it need, depending on whether it's a test or a performance assessment? And then take a look at each question and task, each question on the test or each task on the performance assessment and the accompanying rubrics, and ask yourself, does this get at exactly what it is we want to assess? Sort of the content of the last two webinars, test construction and performance assessment.
So there is one comment that came in. Modification is taking precedence, but also interest in creating performance assessments. That came in privately.
I think that was the intention of the part of the grant, was that while tests are perfectly all right for many purposes, there are probably some opportunities for performance assessments, and those are less common, or at least less commonly used for the purposes that this grant is for. And so this was going to be your opportunity to create some of them. So for each of those, for the each of the things that need to be modified or created, you need to decide who's going to do it. The whole school shouldn't do it, and one person probably shouldn't do it, but a small group of people who would be the right people for that particular assessment should do it. And when are they going to meet? Looks like one of the districts already has set aside some sessions in February and March to do that, and that's a good thing. The grant also talks about once you start changing assessments, then you may be changing something that's already in place in your performance review plans. So you need to describe how what you're doing with your assessments might affect the performance review for the next year. That ought to be sort of a logical thing. If we're changing this assessment, then or if we're substituting a performance assessment, or if we're adding a performance assessment to a test, then to just make the adjustments in the APPR plans that reflect the way the new assessments currently sit. I also will, I don't know to what extent you'll have the opportunity to do this, but I am going to give you a really strong personal recommendation from me that when you modify or create an exam, before you jump to using it for APPR, try it out and see how it goes. See how students respond to it. It may be a lovely exam, but there may be something about it that needs to be modified a bit when you get real students working on the questions or the tasks. So the very first thing you do with an assessment, you don't want to be a high-stakes thing. You want some tryout time. And if you don't have tryout time, if you need something in place by the very next round of APPR exams, then pull aside a couple of students and have them try it out as an exercise, just to see how the questions fare, how the students respond to the tasks, how the rubrics work. You really don't want to just write something and then the first time you use it large scale for a purpose with a lot of consequences to it. So in addition to describing how APPR may change, which is what the Teaching as the Core materials say, I strongly, strongly, strongly urge you to try out your new assessments before you start using them for APPR. The other part of the action plan is about engaging parents. And the idea here is that when you're changing how you assess somebody's kids, they ought to know about it. And that is one of the parts that's supposed to be in the action plan. Some of this you might want to do by describing communication efforts. You know, will you put, for example, a description on the internet, not the assessments themselves, but just a description of these are the sorts of assessments your child will take and here is why. Will you have a meeting? Will you, what will you do? And then in your implementation, you have to actually go ahead and do it. So assuming that engaging parents is is important because the assessments have implications for their children. Start with, what do you want parents to know about how you're changing the assessments? I would take the opportunity, and this is, again, my personal recommendation, if you're going to be engaging parents in assessment, why not engage them in some understanding of the whole assessment system, the whole, here we go, the whole assessment system, rather than just engaging them in a description of the assessments that are changing for right now. It doesn't make sense to me to talk to parents about a little piece of an assessment system, and because parents aren't going to, they're going to hear the word assessment and they're going to think of sort of one thing. They won't realize it's a whole system of things. So what do you want them to know about how you would do assessment in your district? And what do you want them to know about how things may be changing in your district? Then what vehicle, or probably vehicles, some people might not come to a meeting, but they might look at the web or however you communicate with parents. What will best communicate these things to parents? In what ways will you create for parents to be able to interact, supposing they have a question, supposing they have a good idea? What would be the mechanism for getting that into your assessment action planning mix? And then who are the people who are the best people to design and facilitate these meetings, and I should have said, and other communication, things that go up on the web or notices that go home to parents, or however you do that. Again, it shouldn't be a committee of the whole that does all these things. There should be some economies of scale here, some assignments to the people who are going to be the best people to do this. That goes in your action plan too. This slide is a personal recommendation too. When you create ways for parents to be able to interact with the assessment system, many of them will not particularly get all invested in diagrams like my little 4-quadrant diagram, as helpful as I think that is to school people, or lists of assessments or schedules of assessments. What they'll get excited about is when they get to look at student work. So if you have an opportunity to have a meeting with parents, instead of only telling them about, here's this assessment, here's why we're giving it, here's that assessment, here's why we're giving it, get some student work. Some student work that is, how shall I put it, something to shoot for but not out of the ballpark, something that most kids could do, and have parents look at it and say, look at this. This is what we want your kid to learn how to be able to write like this, or to be able to answer questions like this, or to be, if it's a performance assessment, to be able to perform like this. If they do an oral presentation and there's a good one you can share, do a little video of it, so that parents understand the assessments as an assessment is a vehicle for making some appraisals of student work. For them, the student work is the most important and the more fun part. So I would really, really encourage you, if you're trying to engage parents, to harness the power of reviewing student work. That's where oh, I see, this is what they're supposed to do, or I'm proud of the kid who did that, and that kind of feeling. That's where you'll get the engagement of it's not emotional engagement, I'm looking for a word here. That's where you'll get people to really clue in that this is something important and not just another list of things the school district needs to do. Okay. Some people have asked what exactly the action plan needs to look like, and I alluded earlier to the fact that there isn't any one particular form. It should be a plan, and I think of the action plan as sort of analogous to a lesson plan, and the implementation as sort of analogous to teaching the lesson. All of you have been around schools long enough to know there's a billion different ways that you can plan what you're going to do in a lesson. And the proof of whether that lesson plan was any good is when you hand it to a substitute, would that lesson come out the way you intended it to? So similarly, your action plan is basically a list of what you're going to do and why. Your implementation is the actual doing of it. And the implementation is really what matters. A lovely plan that you don't follow through on is sort of worthless. And you can't actually do good implementation unless you have a good plan. So they're both important, but the implementation is sort of where the, well, I'm going to mix metaphors, where the rubber hits the road, or it's the pudding, the proof of the pudding is in the eating. So when it's time to do your action plan, your implementation, distill your plan into a series of things that you can actually judge. Did we do this? How well did we do it? Use the actions and events as a sort of checklist. I don't mean that actually is a literal, I'm not sure you can make a literal checklist out of this, but you certainly need a series of things that you can say, we did this, and here's what happened. As each one of these is accomplished, mark when and by whom so that you know. You'll think you'll remember forever, but you won't. And then link to the results. I don't mean a hyperlink there. I mean just somewhere you need to say, so what happened? Is there a new assessment? Yes, and here is where it is. Or is there a new assessment administration schedule? Did we do any tryouts? What was the data look like? Where is it? Just those sort of very organizing kinds of things that will help keep you moving along with your plans. Continue until you've finished all the things on your action plan and post them by June 1st. Then the professional development, which in this grant is phase 4, but which we've already said is actually sort of ongoing. I personally think there's a lot of professional development to be gained from the assessment review process, looking over what is it we want people to know and what kinds of questions are we asking, what kinds of tasks are we asking kids to do. There should be, just going through that process should help teachers develop their assessment capabilities. But there is a phase, it's phase 4, called professional development. And it's to assist teachers in identifying high quality assessment practices and provide training and resources. It is also supposed to be in accordance with Guskey's 5 levels of evaluation. You're familiar with the first one. Did you like this? Was it satisfactory to you, this professional development? But really there are more levels than that. Whether you liked it or not, did you learn something? Whether you learned something or not, did the way we do assessment in general in this district change, and is there support for it? Whether the district changed or not, do I now have more assessment in knowledge and skills, and am I using them? And then, of course, the ultimate one, and did that make any difference for student learning? When I looked at your RFP, the link to a description of these levels was broken. It didn't work anymore. So I have just, I think just last week, went fishing on the web, and there's another link that if yours is broken, you can't get it, this one should work. So I offered that to you. You can go after that. For professional development and assessment, this is something I can speak to because I do it all the time. Base it on goals. If you are designing a workshop kind of day, make sure that it's not a standalone. Make sure that you design something that connects what people are doing in professional development to their classroom practice. Have it involve reviewing things that are going on in classrooms. Have it involve a lot of teacher talk, And it really works better if you do a little bit over time rather than a whole bunch all at once, with opportunities for follow-up. I also should, if there are any principals listening, professional development, especially in assessment, but in anything, really works best when the administrator is right there in it and is the leading learner, not just administering it, but actually participating. And in the things that the school does, making sure that there is time and support and emphasis. You know, and if assessments are supposed to be changing, ask about them and emphasize the importance of that. So I think we have Engage New York has some downloadable resources for data-driven instruction. They're nice resources. Data-driven instruction is not exactly the same thing as teaching is the core. Teaching is the core focuses on getting assessments right. Data-driven instruction focuses on using assessment information once you've got it to inform instruction. So they're very related, but they're slightly different. And before I go on to do just 5 minutes on data-driven instruction, I want to stop here and ask about if there are any questions about the 4 phases: assessment review, action plan implementation, and professional development that you have before I sort of change the subject for a couple of slides. Hearing none. It's hard for me to gauge how long it takes people to type. Okay. Well, if you're typing, keep typing, but I'm going to go on. Using data to inform instruction is a very worthwhile purpose. In my personal opinion, it's a more worthwhile purpose than using test results for professional performance review. And be real careful. Don't go running out saying, Sue says APPR isn't a good process. But what I mean by that is just test results are only part of the picture of how a teacher teaches. But when you use data to inform instruction, the data really is the outcome in a bigger sense. You know, if the kid didn't learn what I was trying to teach, that no matter how wonderful the teaching was, I need to do something about it. Data-driven instruction processes always look something like this. This one is adapted from Boudet City and Murnane, but they all start with create some sort of look at the data, dig deep into the data, and then plan further instruction. Data overviews are important because data often comes in looking like this. This is from another state. This is state test data from another state, from a school in another state, so that it's not particularly identifiable to you. But you know, nobody could make sense of that. You need some data overview that will address the questions that you're going to be answering. So summarize it in some way that makes sense. This one comes from the Engage New York data-driven instruction page, and I don't know if you can see it or not, but there's a list of kids' names down the side and a list of questions across the top. And by summarizing across and down, you can figure out exactly what each kid is good at, not so good at, individually and as a group, which is a whole lot more interpretable than something like that just page of numbers that I showed you before. And then you need to find out why their performance is like that. Don't jump right from data to don't jump right from data to making a decision. Try and figure out why the data look like they do. And when you do that, you'll end up with sentences that start with students. In the example I'm using, you might say, our students have trouble explaining their mathematical reasoning. Well, great, except what are you going to do about that? So look at your instruction and try and turn that problem into a problem that's not a problem that's the students, but it's a problem for teachers, a problem of practice that you can do something about. So turn the sentence around. Typically, people do this with sticky notes, so I made my little yellow sticky notes there. But however you examine your instruction, you should end up with a sentence that says the teachers could do this or could do that. In the example I'm using, the teachers might say, if we spent more time on math vocabulary and conceptual approaches to teaching as opposed to algorithmic approaches, our kids might be better at mathematical communication. So you try that out, and then you look at your assessment data again, and you see if it worked, and decide what else you need to change. So data-driven instruction is this sort of ongoing circle of using data to change instruction and to tweak, and it assumes that the data actually means something. The teaching is the core is a prior question. It's, do the data actually mean what we want them to mean? And are they sound enough, are the assessment results sound enough to base big decisions on, like instructional improvement, like APPR decisions? So they're related but not exactly the same. So some of the resources that you will be able to find will help you with both of them. Before I turn this back to Juliet, I want to answer a question that's sitting on the chat box. It says, where can I find resources for finding quality professional development on assessment question building? Now, you are asking the wrong person here, because I personally just published a book on that. So, and this is not the purpose of this webinar is not to recommend my own book. There are lots of people, not just me, who have resources about how to write good questions and tasks. Writing good test questions is something that you probably can also find in just general assessment textbook kind of resources. Writing good performance assessments, I have found the information there is much more variable. Every book you pick up that talks about how to write a good test question is going to give you about the same information. But resources that I have seen for teachers that talk about how to write performance assessments range in quality and in what they describe more. The variability in those materials is wider than in the test construction resources. So rather than give you a list of, at least out loud here, give you a list of resources like that, what do you think, Juliet? Would it be does the Regents Research Fund and NICED want to be in the business of recommending resources? How should we best answer this question?
I think that, I think that, well, first of all, I'm sure your book is a fine resource. So right,
but I feel a little embarrassed if you just happened to ask a question that was the topic of my last book, and I thought, oh, no.
Right. We do have, we do have some resources at the back of the Teaching is the Core RFP. on professional development, and then other sort of topics related to teaching as the core, including things like professional development. But we need someone who can come and present. So that is the kind of, I guess for resources like that, maybe, I don't know, Vicki?
Yeah, so this is Vicki. We can't really give, vendor name to you. I think the best place would be to go to the RFP and look at those resources first. And I'll look into this and see if there is a list that possibly we can give you. So I'm writing that down, and I'll get back to you.
Okay. So I hope that was clear. Before I pass it over to Juliet, I'm going to just remind you that the purpose of going over this was to talk about how these 4 phases kind of roll from one into the other. That they're all based on the assessment review, which in turn should be based on a prior consideration, and that is, what is it that we need to assess? And that should be based on your standards and what you're trying to teach, and the purposes that you have for using the information. And then the rest of it should just roll. So if you reviewed the assessments and there's some that need to be modified, the action plan is, so who's going to modify them and when are they going to do that? And the implementation is, so do it. Did they modify them? And where is the assessment? There it is. Try it out. And then the professional development phase is the need for assessment literacy, the need for people to continually modify assessments. It's not going to go away because teaching as the core is over, and you need to develop sort of some assessment, some people call it assessment literacy, assessment capabilities among teachers as a professional competency. Just like you're competent at doing instructional moves, you should be competent at assessment moves. And that, again, is kind of notoriously not well done in teacher preparation, which means a lot of it ends up being done in professional development. So with that, I'm going to pass back the board to Juliet.
Great. Thank you. I see I have presenter privileges now. Before I wrap up, we did have a question that came in from one attendee, and I just want to find the question so that I can read it word for word, because I don't want...
I have it, Juliet.
But you have it written down? Okay, thanks, Vicki.
Yes,
you can go ahead.
Yep, that's okay. This is Vicki. Nassau BOCES had the question, has the SLO regulation changed that the teachers cannot see the assessments prior to administration? And how can the same assessment be used for instruction and for APPR? So I'm not an APPR guru, so I go to the guidance document constantly, so I'm going to paste the link to the guidance document, and I just sent it to everybody right there. But in the document, it's the guidance on New York's annual professional performance reviews, law, and regulations. Section G gets into the security of the assessments. Specifically, G3 talks about how teachers and principals should not distribute any test items to students that will later contribute to the teacher's principal's annual performance evaluation. So the big thing is not to share items with students ahead of time, as a full assessment. Just share, it says districts cannot release actual operational test items, including performance tasks and writing prompts, but you can release sample items and sample test forms that will help familiarize students with the testing format. So I just encourage you to go back to that guidance document, and if you have a specific question, send it to educatoreval@nysed.gov, and that's the APPR team, and they are happy to get back to you with specific questions. So thank you for that, but we want to focus more on the assessment review and the results of your assessment review and the action plan. All right, thanks.
Thanks, Vicki. Okay, and for those of you who either came in late to the webinar or would like a copy of the slides, and if you did not receive them, I'm listing on the slide in front of you right now the website that you can go to for the webinar video and slides, which should be posted in a couple of days. If you need the slides immediately for any reason, I'm just typing my email address into the chat box right now, and so I've emailed a few people the slides. We have funding to have another webinar if necessary, although we don't have one planned as of yet. The reason we didn't have one planned is because we are really depending on your feedback to get an idea of what may be helpful to you with respect to your teaching as the core planning. And so we're asking that feedback to come through from the survey. And so the survey is, the link is listed right here. It's a SurveyMonkey link, and I'm also typing in the survey link to everyone in the chat box. If you could fill that out, it'll give us some guidance on what our next webinar can be focusing on. And I just had a note sent to me about the previous webinar and slides. If you go to the link that's on the slide right now, and I'll actually copy and paste that into the chat box for you so that you can click on it, you can access previously recorded webinars and slides from our 3 previous webinars as well. Okay, so all of the materials should be there. Please do fill out the survey. It's really quick. And with that, we can end things. I'd like to say thank you very much to Dr. Brookhart for leading us through not just this webinar, but the other ones as well. And yeah, we hope to hear from you. Yep, Vicki, go ahead.
This is Vicki. I'm going to the Engage New York, and there's the only number 1 and 2 is posted right now. So number 3 we're waiting to post. So
yeah, number 3 we're waiting to post. It should have been posted by now, but I'm going to follow up with the folks who post it, and hopefully it'll get up there soon. If you check back by tomorrow and it's not posted, do feel free to email me, and I can send you the slides and find a way to send you the video. But it should be included on the website by tomorrow, I'm hoping. All right.
Okay. Thanks, Juliet.
Okay. Thank you so much, everybody. Have a nice day.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.